Some quick notes, hopefully quick, on best practices for zoning techniques to preserve and enhance the character of the villages. Other places have good village forms with appropriate streetscapes, walkability, good mixed-use character. We get things like this. And this. The image on the right is us, target with a weak buffer. The image on the left could be us. If you have a zoning map with red on it for commercial, that red district could be built like this, or it could be built like this. The ordinance can control that. We have ordinances that don't work. They're Euclidean ordinances. They primarily regulate use. They're complicated. They isolate different uses, and they let the street be an entirely different entity with its own life that's not controlled by the zoning ordinance. Traditional zoning, as you see on the left, focuses on the use. Then it kind of eventually gives some nod to what the form is. An ideal way to look at village zoning would be to focus on the form and make that form reinforcing the village form in future development, and de-emphasize the use. Traditional zoning is use-based, you look on the right, and form-based or village preservation would de-emphasize the use and emphasize the form. Traditional zoning looks to districts. A form-based village preservation would look at the neighborhoods and the streets. Traditional would have segregation of land. Appropriate village-based zoning would look at mixed use, because that's what our villages are. Traditional zoning, because of the way it has to be written, it gives uniformity in neighborhoods. Obviously, diversity in neighborhoods is what you have in our villages. Limited ability to affect change. We need something that is written with the ability to transform what is wrong and preserve what is good. Traditional zoning has limited design standards. That is incredibly important for village preservation. We need something that focuses on the building site and the building form. Traditional zoning focuses on setbacks. The more noxious something is, you just pull it further and further away from the property line. That's not the way to look to build a village. You want to have build-to lines to create the edge, especially on the commercial parts of the village. Traditional zoning focuses on the site. It just abandons the street, basically. A form-based village preservation is gonna give attention to the street, and in particular the streetscape, and that goes back to the build-to lines idea. The traditional zoning emphasizes individual uses of the property. A proper village preservation ordinance would have emphasis on the building and how it fits into the village. So I'm suggesting that we look at a form-based code as a model of how to do the village planning. Form-based code has what's called a regulating plan that tells you where these appropriate design guidelines are supposed to apply. It has public space standards. In other words, how you design the street. You take ownership of the street. This ties in very closely with traffic calming. It has building form standards, and those don't just give a few nods about materials to be used. They really give some tight controls on a block-by-block basis of what the buildings are supposed to look like. And then, of course, you have administration and definitions like you would have in any other ordinance. But the key difference that's important to us is that an appropriate village ordinance is going to focus on the street character. And this is an example how a form-based code does that. It identifies the various corridors that go through the area, for example, through the Oaks Village, identifies what their characteristics ought to be, and then creates designs that we're going to aspire to as we do a build out or a gradual infill of the village. Another extremely important issue to be addressed is the fact that a diversity or a variety within the block is incredibly important in our villages. In other words, as you look at the image on the left and the image on the right, you'll see that within a block, various portions of that block, because of their frontages, and especially if they have double frontage on a major intersection, are going to have different intensities, densities, masses, sizes, build-to lines, and characteristics. That is what we need to have to do appropriate village zoning. If you take a look at Oaks and you kind of overlay the graphic on the right, you can readily see how that a careful, thoughtful zoning ordinance that doesn't have a haphazard jumble of uses, but has a planned, respectful transition of uses from high intensity down to a residential district is important, and that's hard to get with the ordinances as we have them now. So how do we get this done? One of the key things is that we alluded to before, this regulating plan. You take a diagram of the village, you say what's going to happen where. That regulating plan tells you where the intensity happens and where the smaller scale stuff happens. So the regulating plan identifies what the zoning of the various frontages is supposed to look like. And you can understand in this diagram, it explains the previous regulating plan. It tells you what sort of frontage needs to happen. So on this block, you're going to have small apartment, you're going to have general storefront, and you're going to have general urban frontage. Different frontages happening on the different faces of this block, because that's how a village would get built, and that's how our villages are, and that's how they need to be reinforced. Then you move to putting in standards. The standards regulate what the streets are going to be built like, what the frontages are going to be, what building types are appropriate. And you can see it's prescriptive. It's not just a couple notes about materials. It's what is an appropriate yard to have, and diagrams that represent the massing. It's something that everyone can understand and look to and say whether or not the developer is providing what's in the ordinance. It's got siting specifications, and once again this build to line, not the setbacks, but it tells you what the fenestration, which is basically the windows, what those proportions need to be to give you the appropriate village feel. The standards go every scale from the urban to the individual site, and then the formation of the individual buildings. And they identify building placement. It's not setbacks, it's build to lines, so that we get an urban edge. We don't get just a nondescript zone out in front that you can park cars and trucks with signage for your plumber or whatever else that we've been battling in our village. Once again, we got the diagrams, the build to lines, what the massing can be. The next step down from standards is the guidelines portion. I think of these as aspirational, not regulatory. They are images of what we want to see happen there. Good stuff done elsewhere as an example for us to apply in our municipality. These two slides are showing you what some other form-based codes have done to pull images from other places within the state or even around the nation and say, here's some examples of what we want you to put in when you do your project, Mr. Developer. Some of the advantages of using an FBC for village preservation are that because they're prescriptive, they state what you want, the result is more predictable. Another important point for village preservation, especially for the Village of Oaks, is because they regulate development at the scale of the individual building. They encourage independent development by multiple property owners, but in doing so, the individual property owners are building toward the graphic that is controlled by the regulating plan and the guidance of the form-based code, and that obviates the necessity really for the master planning that the ONA has been pushing for. It's a key point for us. They work well in established communities because they help to define and codify the village's existing DNA. The building types that are there can be replicated, and we can promote infill that it's compatible with the surrounding structures. Non-professionals, that's just about everyone else besides the one or two of the planners, the guy and the lawyers that write the typical codes, find the FBCs easier to use because they're shorter, they're more concise, they're more organized, and they're pictures. They tell you what we expect to have. There's problems with some of them, things we need to avoid. Assuming for a moment we wanted to have a form-based code put in place, there's a couple different ways that it goes in. A mentor exclusive method is used on Main Street projects and historic neighborhoods. Often the FBC is exclusive and mandatory. That might seem like it's appropriate for the village, but another option is, I think, better for us. I'm going to suggest that if we were to go ahead with an FBC, one of the best things to do would be this parallel option. Continue with the Euclidean zoning with as many constraints and restrictions as we want to put in, but have the FBC also written. If some landowner wanted to build on land that is zoned and as residential, let's say, under the current Euclidean zoning, if he wanted to change, he would have to follow the form-based code for any commercial development. So either build under the very restrictive ordinance as it is and stay residential, or go commercial and build to a well-designed form-based code. Finally, where do we would go from here? I would say there's three basic options. We do our inventory analysis, we look at everything, we do a visioning exercise, maybe your charrette, decide what we really want, and then either we go with an option of doing a form-based code, or just take the research we've done and just have it as sort of a setup for a form-based code in the future, or just have all this stuff as a citizen's desires document. In other words, every time something comes before the Planning Commission, we reference back to this work that has been done and say, here's the stuff that we'd really like to have. It doesn't rise to the level of an ordinance, but at least it's a document, a little bit like the Egypt Road mitigation plan that says, here's something that the citizens would like to see put in place. Can you please make it happen? So this is just some suggestions about putting some good practices in place to preserve our villages.